前，在这一章节中 ，Sam Altman、Lex Fridman 讨论了开源模型的话题。Sam 认为开源模型肯定有其存在的意义，尤其是人们可以在本地运行的较小模型，这类模型有很大的需求。未来可能会出现一些开源模型和一些闭源模型并存的局面。Sam 还谈到从非营利组织转型为盈利性公司的问题，他强烈建议创业公司一开始就直接采取盈利性的模式。对于与马斯克的关系 ，Sam 表示尊重马斯克，希望未来能保持良好友好的关系。
What are the pros and cons of open sourcing? Have you played around with this idea?
Yeah, I think there is definitely a place for open source models, particularly smaller models that people can run locally. I think there's huge demand for. I think there will be some open source models. There will be some closed source models. It won't be unlike other ecosystems in that way.
I listened to All In podcast talking about this lawsuit and all that kind of stuff, and they were more concerned about the precedent of going from nonprofit to this cap for profit. What precedent this sets for other startups? Is that something?
I would heavily discourage any startup that was thinking about starting as a nonprofit and adding like a for-profit arm later. I'd heavily discourage them from doing that. I don't think we'll set a precedent here.
Okay. So most startups should go just...
For sure. And again, if we knew what was going to happen, we would have done that too.
Well, like in theory, if you like dance beautifully here, you could, there's like some tax incentives or whatever. But
I don't think that's like how most people think about these things.
So it's not possible to save a lot of money for a startup if you do it this way.
No, I think there's like laws that would make that pretty difficult.
Where do you hope this goes with Elon? What this tension, this dance, where do you hope this? Like if we go 1, 2, 3 years from now, your relationship with him on a personal level too, like friendship, friendly competition, just all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I really respect Elon. And I hope that years in the future, we have an amicable relationship.
Yeah, I hope you guys have an amicable relationship like this month. And just compete and win and explore these ideas together. I do suppose there's competition for talent or whatever, but it should be friendly competition. Just build cool shit. And Elon is pretty good at building cool shit. But so are you.
关于 Sora 这一章节主要讨论了 Sora 这个视频合成模型。Sam 和 Lex 探讨了 Sora 在处理遮蔽、模拟世界物理规律等方面的能力。Sam 表示，目前这些模型对世界的理解可能比我们想象的要多，虽然仍存在一些明显的错误和误解。他认为，随着模型规模的增大，他们的表现会越来越好。谈到视频生成技术对创作者的影响 ，Sam 认为人们总是能以新的方式使用新工具，就像摄影出现后成为一种新的艺术形式一样。他预测未来 YouTube 等平台上相当一部分视频的制作都会用到 AI 工具。
Very clear things they just don't understand or don't get right. It's easy to like look at the weaknesses, see through the veil, and say, this is all fake. But it's not all fake. It's just some of it works and some of it doesn't work. Like, I remember when I started first watching Sora videos and I would see like a person walk in front of something for a few seconds and occlude it and then walk away and the same thing was still there. I was like, this is pretty good. Or there's examples where like the underlying physics looks so well represented over, a lot of steps in a sequence. It's like, this is like quite impressive. But like fundamentally, these models are just getting better and that will keep happening. If you look at the trajectory from DALL-E 1 to 2 to 3 to Sora, there were a lot of people that were dunked on each version saying it can't do this, it can't do that. And like, look at it now.
So, well, the thing you just mentioned is kind of with occlusions is basically modeling the physics, the three-dimensional physics of the world sufficiently well to capture those kinds of things.
Well,
maybe you can tell me, in order to deal with occlusions, what does the world model need to?
Yeah, so what I would say is it's doing something to deal with occlusions really well. Would I represent that it has like a great underlying 3D model of the world? It's a little bit more of a stretch.
But can you get there through just these kinds of two-dimensional training data approaches?
It looks like this approach is going to go surprisingly far. I don't want to speculate too much about what limits it will surmount and which it won't, but...
What are some interesting limitations of the system that you've seen? I mean, there's been some fun ones you've posted.
There's all kinds of ones. I mean, like, cats sprouting an extra limb at random points in a video. Pick what you want, but there's still a lot of problems, a lot of weaknesses.
Do you think that's a fundamental flaw of the approach? Or is it just, bigger model or better, like, technical details or better data, more data is going to solve those the cat sprouting?
I would say yes to both. Like, I think there is something about the approach which just seems to feel different from how we think and learn and whatever. And then also, I think it'll get better with scale.
Like I mentioned, LLMs have tokens, text tokens, and Sora has visual patches. So it converts all visual data, diverse kinds of visual data, videos and images into patches. Is the training to the degree you can say fully self-supervised, or is there some manual labeling going on? Like, what's the involvement of humans in all this?
I mean, without saying anything specific about the Sora approach, we use lots of human data in our work.
But not internet scale data. So lots of humans. Lots is a complicated word, Sam.
I think lots is a fair word in this case.
But it doesn't, because to me, lots, like, listen, I'm an introvert, and when I hang out with like 3 people, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like 4 people, that's a lot. But I suppose you mean more than
3 people work on labeling the data for these models, yeah.
Okay. All right. But fundamentally, there's a lot of self-supervised learning, because what you mentioned in the technical report is internet scale data. That's another beautiful, it's like poetry. So it's a lot of data that's not human label. It's like, it's self-supervised in that way.
Yeah.
And then the question is how much data is there on the internet that could be used in this, that is conducive to this kind of self-supervised way? If only we knew the details of the self-supervised. Have you considered opening it up a little more details?
We have. You mean for Sora specifically?
Sora specifically, because it's so interesting that, like, can the same magic of LLMs now start moving towards visual data? And what does that take to do that?
I mean, it looks to me like yes, but we have more work to do.
Sure. What are the dangers? Why are you concerned about releasing the system? What are some possible dangers of this?
I mean, frankly speaking, one thing we have to do before releasing the system is just like get it to work at a level of efficiency that will deliver the scale people are going to want from this. So that I don't want to like downplay that. And there's still a ton of work to do there. But, you can imagine like issues with deepfakes, misinformation. Like, we try to be a thoughtful company about what we put out into the world. And it doesn't take much thought to think about the ways this can go badly.
There's a lot of tough questions here. You're dealing in a very tough space. Do you think training AI should be or is fair use under copyright law?
I think the question behind that question is, do people who create valuable data deserve to have some way that they get compensated for use of it? And that, I think the answer is yes. I don't know yet what the answer is. People have proposed a lot of different things. We've tried some different models. But, if I'm like an artist, for example, A, I would like to be able to opt out of people generating art in my style. And B, if they do generate art in my style, I'd like to have some economic model associated with that.
Yeah, it's that transition from CDs to Napster to Spotify. We have to figure out some kind of model.
The model changes, but people have got to get paid.
Well, there should be some kind of incentive, if we zoom out even more, for humans to keep doing cool shit.
Everything I worry about, humans are going to do cool shit, and society is going to find some way to reward it. That seems pretty hardwired. We want to create, we want to be useful, we want to like achieve status in whatever way. That's not going anywhere, I don't think.
But the reward might not be monetary, financial. It might be like fame and celebration of other cool
maybe financial in some other way. Again, I don't think we've seen like the last evolution of how the economic system is going to work.
Yeah, but artists and creators are worried. When they see Sora, they're like, holy shit.
Sure, artists were also super worried when photography came out.
Yeah.
And then photography became a new art form and people made a lot of money taking pictures. And I think things like that will keep happening. People will use the new tools in new ways.
If we just look on YouTube or something like this, how much of that will be using Sora like AI generated content, do you think, in the next 5 years?
People talk about like how many jobs they are going to do in 5 years. And the framework that people have is what percentage of current jobs are just going to be totally replaced by some AI doing the job. The way I think about it is not what percent of jobs AI will do, but what percent of tasks will AI do and over what time horizon. So if you think of all of the like 5-second tasks in the economy, the 5-minute tasks, the 5-hour tasks, maybe even the 5-day tasks, how many of those can AI do? And I think that's a way more interesting, impactful, important question than how many jobs AI can do, because it is a tool that will work at increasing levels of sophistication and over longer and longer time horizons for more and more tasks, and let people operate at a higher level of abstraction. So maybe people are way more efficient at the job they do. And at some point, that's not just a quantitative change, but it's a qualitative one too, about the kinds of problems you can keep in your head. I think that for videos on YouTube, it'll be the same. Many videos, maybe most of them, will use AI tools in the production, but they'll still be fundamentally driven by a person thinking about it, putting it together, doing parts of it, sort of directing and running it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, it's scary, but it's interesting to think about. I tend to believe that humans like to watch other humans or other human-like
Humans really care about other humans a lot.
Yeah. If there's a cooler thing that's better than a human, humans care about that for like 2 days and then they go back to humans.
That seems very deeply wired.
It's the whole chess thing.
Yeah.
But no, let's everybody keep playing chess. And let's ignore the elephant in the room that humans are really bad at chess relative to AI systems.
We still run races and cars are much faster. I mean, there's like a lot of examples.
Yeah. And maybe it'll just be tooling like in the Adobe suite type of way where you can just make videos much easier and all that kind of stuff. Listen, I hate being in front of the camera. If I can figure out a way to not be in front of the camera, I would love it. Unfortunately, it'll take a while. Like that, generating faces, it's getting there. But generating faces in video format is tricky.
GPT-4 Sam 和 Lex 讨论了 GPT-4 给人留下深刻印象的能力，以及它所存在的一些局限性。Sam 提到，他经常把 GPT-4 当做一个创新性的头脑风暴伙伴，在给事物命名、以新的视角思考问题等方面有独特的帮助。他还指出 ，GPT-4 在处理需要拆分成多个步骤的长期任务时，有令人惊喜的表现。不过 ，Sam 认为目前的 GPT-4 离他们的最终目标还有很大差距，未来的版本会有巨大的进步，以至于回顾 GPT-4 可能会像现在看 GPT-3 一样。
I think it kind of sucks.
Typical human also. Gotten used to an awesome thing.
No, I think it is an amazing thing. But relative to where we need to get to and where I believe we will get to, at the time of like GPT-3, people were like, oh, this is amazing. This is this like marvel of technology. And it was. But, now we have GPT-4 and you look at GPT-3 and you're like, that's unimaginably horrible. I expect that the delta between 5 and 4 will be the same as between 4 and 3. And I think it is our job to live a few years in the future and remember that the tools we have now are going to kind of suck looking backwards at them. And that's how we make sure the future is better.
What are the most glorious ways in that GPT-4 sucks? Meaning,
what are the best things it can do?
What are the best things it can do and the limits of those best things that allow you to say it sucks, therefore gives you an inspiration and hope for the future?
One thing I've been using it for more recently is sort of like a brainstorming partner.
Yep.
And
I love it for that.
There's a glimmer of something amazing in there. I don't think it gets, when people talk about it, what it does, they're like, oh, it helps me code more productively. It helps me write more faster and better. It helps me, translate from this language to another. All these like amazing things, but there's something about the like kind of creative brainstorming partner. I need to come up with a name for this thing. I need to like think about this problem in a different way. I'm not sure what to do here. That I think like gives a glimpse of something I hope to see more of. One of the other things that you can see like a very small glimpse of is when it can help on longer horizon tasks. Break down something into multiple steps, maybe like execute some of those steps, search the internet, write code, whatever, put that together. When that works, which is not very often, it's like very magical.
The iterative back and forth with a human. Well, it works a lot for me. What do you mean?
Iterative back and forth with a human, it can get more often. When it can go do like a 10-step problem on its own.
Oh.
It doesn't work for that too often. Sometimes.
At multiple layers of abstraction, or do you mean just sequential?
Both, like, to break it down and then do things at different layers of abstraction and put them together. Look, I don't want to like downplay the accomplishment of GPT-4, but I don't want to overstate it either. And I think this point that we are on an exponential curve, we will look back relatively soon at GPT-4 like we look back at GPT-3 now.
That said, I mean, ChatGPT was a transition to where people like started to believe it. There is an uptick of believing. Not internally at OpenAI, perhaps. There's believers here, but when you think
in that sense, I do think it'll be a moment where a lot of the world went from not believing to believing. That was more about the ChatGPT interface than and by the interface and product, I also mean the post-training of the model and how we tune it to be helpful to you and how to use it than the underlying model itself.
How much of those two, each of those things are important? The underlying model and the RLHF or something of that nature that tunes it to be more compelling to the human, more effective and productive for the human.
I mean, they're both super important, but the RLHF, the post-training step, the little wrapper of things that, from a compute perspective, little wrapper of things that we do on top of the base model, even though it's a huge amount of work. Mm-hmm. That's really important, to say nothing of the product that we build around it. In some sense, like, we did have to do two things. We had to invent the underlying technology, and then we had to figure out how to make it into a product people would love, which is not just about the actual product work itself, but this whole other step of how you align it and make it useful.
And how you make the scale work where a lot of people can use it at the same time, all that kind of stuff.
And that. But, that was like a known difficult thing. Like, we knew we were going to have to scale it up. We had to go do two things that had like never been done before, that were both like, I would say, quite significant achievements. And then a lot of things like scaling it up that other companies have had to do before.
How does the context window of going from 8K to 128K tokens compare from GPT-4 to GPT-4 Turbo?
People like long. Most people don't need all the way to 128 most of the time. Although, if we dream into the distant future, we'll have like way distant future. Mm-hmm. We'll have like context length of several billion. You will feed in all of your information, all of your history over time, and it'll just get to know you better and better, and that'll be great. For now, the way people use these models, they're not doing that. And, people sometimes post in a paper or, a significant fraction of a code repository or whatever. But most usage of the models is not using the long context most of the time.
I like that this is your I have a dream speech. One day you'll be judged by the full context of your character or of your whole lifetime. That's interesting. So that's part of the expansion that you're hoping for, is a greater and greater context. I saw this internet clip once. I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but it was like Bill Gates talking about the amount of memory on some early computer. Maybe 64K, maybe 640K, something like that. And most of it was used for the screen buffer. Hmm. And he just couldn't, it seemed genuine, couldn't imagine that the world would eventually need gigabytes of memory in a computer or terabytes of memory in a computer. And you always do.
or you always do just need to like follow the exponential of technology, and we're going to we will find out how to use better technology. So I can't really imagine what it's like right now for context links to go out to the billions someday. And they might not literally go there, but effectively it'll feel like that. But I know we'll use it and really not want to go back once we have it.
Yeah, even saying billions 10 years from now might seem dumb because it'll be like trillions upon trillions.
Sure.
There'll be some kind of breakthrough that will effectively feel like infinite context. But even 120, I have to be honest, I haven't pushed it to that degree. Maybe putting in entire books or like parts of books and so on, papers. What are some interesting use cases of GPT-4 that you've seen?
The thing that I find most interesting is not any particular use case, that we can talk about those, but it's people who kind of like, this is mostly younger people, but people who use it as like their default start for any kind of knowledge work task.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that it can do a lot of things reasonably well. You can use GPT-V, you can use it to help you write code, you can use it to help you do search, you can use it to like edit a paper. The most interesting thing to me is the people who just use it as the start of their workflow.
I do as well for many things. Like I use it as a reading partner for reading books. It helps me think through ideas, especially when the books are classics. So it's really well written about, and it actually is I find it often to be significantly better than even like Wikipedia on well-covered topics. It's somehow more balanced and more nuanced, or maybe it's me, but it inspires me to think deeper than a Wikipedia article does. I'm not exactly sure what that is. You mentioned like this collaboration. I'm not sure where the magic is, if it's in here or if it's in there, or if it's somewhere in between. I'm not sure. But one of the things that concerns me for a knowledge task when I start with GPT is I'll usually have to do fact checking after. Like check that it didn't come up with fake stuff. How do you figure that out? That, GPT can come up with fake stuff that sounds really convincing. So how do you ground it in truth?
That's obviously an area of intense interest for us. I think it's going to get a lot better with upcoming versions, but we'll have to continue to work on it, and we're not going to have it like all solved this year.
Well, the scary thing is like as it gets better, you'll start not doing the fact checking more and more, right?
I'm of two minds about that. I think people are like much more sophisticated users of technology than we often give them credit for. And people seem to really understand that any of these models hallucinate some of the time. And if it's mission critical, you got to check it.
Except journalists don't seem to understand that. I've seen journalists half-assedly just using GPT-4. It's
of the long list of things I'd like to dunk on journalists for, this is not my top criticism of them.
Well, I think the bigger criticism is perhaps the pressures and the incentives of being a journalist is that you have to work really quickly, and this is a shortcut. I would love our society to incentivize like
I would too.
a journalistic efforts that take days and weeks and rewards great in-depth journalism. Also journalism that presents stuff in a balanced way where it's like celebrates people while criticizing them, even though the criticism is the thing that gets clicks, and making shit up also gets clicks, and headlines that mischaracterize completely. I'm sure you have a lot of people dunking on, well, all that drama probably got a lot of clicks.
Probably did.
And that's a bigger problem about human civilization I'd love to see solved, is where we celebrate a bit more. You've given ChatGPT the ability to have memories. You've been playing with that about previous conversations. And also the ability to turn off memory. I wish I could do that sometimes. Just turn on and off, depending. I guess sometimes alcohol can do that, but not optimally, I suppose. What have you seen through that, like playing around with that idea of remembering conversations and not?
We're very early in our explorations here, but I think what people want, or at least what I want for myself, is a model that gets to know me and gets more useful to me over time. This is an early exploration. I think there's like a lot of other things to do, but that's where we'd like to head. You'd like to use a model, and over the course of your life, or use a system, there'll be many models, and over the course of your life, it gets better and better.
Yeah, how hard is that problem? Because right now it's more like remembering little factoids and preferences and so on. What about remembering, like, don't you want GPT to remember all the shit you went through in November and all the drama, and then you can, because right now you're clearly blocking it out a little bit.
It's not just that I want it to remember that. I want it to integrate the lessons of that.
Yes.
And remind me in the future what to do differently or what to watch out for. Mm-hmm. And, we all gain from experience over the course of our lives, varying degrees. And I'd like my AI agent to gain with that experience too. So if we go back and let ourselves imagine that, trillions and trillions of context length, if I can put every conversation I've ever had with anybody in my life in there, if I can have all of my emails input out, like all of my input output in the context window every time I ask a question, that'd be pretty cool, I think.
内层隐私的问题 ，Sam 和 Lex 探讨了为 AI 模型赋予记忆力的话题。Sam 表示，他们在这方面还处于早期阶段，但是希望未来模型能随着时间推移，越来越了解用户，变得更加有用。他举例说，如果模型能记住用户所有的对话、邮件往来等，在用户每次提问时都纳入考虑，那将会非常酷。不过 ，Sam 也强调隐私的重要性。主张应该让用户自己来选择，希望 AI 记住还是遗忘哪些信息。在谈到自己不愉快的个人经历时 ，Sam 坦言，虽然这些经历带来了很大的痛苦，但他认为自己有义务继续前进，投入到最重要的工作中去。
Sometimes companies in the past have been kind of shady about it's kind of presumed that we're collecting all your data and we're using it for a good reason, for advertisement and so on. But there's not a transparency about the details of that.
That's totally true. You mentioned earlier that I'm like blocking out the November stuff.
I'm just teasing you.
Well, I think it was a very traumatic thing, and it did immobilize me for a long period of time. Like definitely the hardest work thing I've had to do was just like keep working that period, because I had to try to come back in here and put the pieces together while I was just like in sort of shock and pain, and nobody really cares about that. I mean, the team gave me a pass and I was not working at my normal level, but there was a period where I was just like, it was really hard to have to do both. But I kind of woke up one morning and I was like, this was a horrible thing to happen to me. I think I could just feel like a victim forever. Or I can say this is like the most important work I'll ever touch in my life and I need to get back to it. And it doesn't mean that I've repressed it, because sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it, but I do feel like an obligation to keep moving forward.
Well, that's beautifully said, but there could be some lingering stuff in there. Like what I would be concerned about is that trust thing that you mentioned, that being paranoid about people, as opposed to just trusting everybody or most people, like using your gut. It's a tricky dance.
For sure.
I mean, because I've seen in my part-time explorations, I've been diving deeply into the Zelensky administration, the Putin administration, and the dynamics there in wartime in a very highly stressful environment. And what happens is distrust, and you isolate yourself both. And you start to not see the world clearly. And that's a concern. That's a human concern. You seem to have taken it in stride and kind of learned the good lessons and felt the love and let the love energize you, which is great, but still can linger in there. There's just some questions I would love to ask your intuition about what's GPT able to do and not. So it's allocating approximately the same amount of compute for each token it generates. Is there room there in this kind of approach to slower thinking, sequential thinking?
I think there will be a new paradigm for that kind of thinking.
Will it be similar, like architecturally, as what we're seeing now with LLMs? Is it a layer on top of the LLMs?
I can imagine many ways to implement that. I think that's less important than the question you were getting at, which is, do we need a way to do a slower kind of thinking where the answer doesn't have to get it's like I guess spiritually you could say that you want an AI to be able to think harder about a harder problem,
right,
and answer more quickly about an easier problem. And I think that will be important.
Is that like a human thought that we're just having? You should be able to think hard. Is that a wrong intuition?
I suspect that's a reasonable intuition.
Interesting. So it's not possible once the GPT gets like GPT-7, we'll just be instantaneously be able to see, here's the proof from our STM.
It seems to me like you want to be able to allocate more compute to harder problems. Like, it seems to me that a system knowing, if you ask a system like that, prove Fermat's last theorem versus what's today's date, unless it already knew and had memorized the answer to the proof, assuming it's got to go figure that out, seems like that will take more compute.
But can it look like basically LLM talking to itself, that kind of thing?
Maybe. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could imagine working. What the right or the best way to do that will be, we don't know.
Q 星项目在谈到神秘的 Q 星项目时 ，Sam 表示他们还没准备好公开讨论这个项目。他提到 OpenAI 一直致力于提高系统的推理能力，对此非常感兴趣，但还没有找到完整的答案。Sam 还反思了他们的渐进式发布策略，认为这有利于让世界逐步适应和思考 AI 的进步。他坦言 ，OpenAI 可能在执行上还有些偏颇，也许未来应该用不同的方式来发布类似 GPT-5 这样的重大产品。
It would be nice if we were able to have something like that.
Can you speak to what Q-Star is?
We are not ready to talk about that.
See, but an answer like that means there's something to talk about. It's very mysterious, Sam.
I mean, we work on all kinds of research.
Yeah.
We have said for a while that we think better reasoning in these systems is an important direction that we'd like to pursue. We haven't cracked the code yet. We're very interested in it.
Is there going to be moments, Q-Star or otherwise, where there's going to be leaps similar to ChatGPT, where you're like...
That's a good question. What do I think about that? It's interesting. To me, it all feels pretty continuous.
Right. This is kind of a theme that you're saying is there's you're basically gradually going up an exponential slope. But from an outsider perspective, from me just watching it, it does feel like there's leaps. But to you, there isn't.
I do wonder if we should have... So, part of the reason that we deploy the way we do is that we think, we call it iterative deployment. We, rather than go build in secret until we got all the way to GPT-5, we decided to talk about GPT-1, 2, 3, and 4. And part of the reason there is I think AI and surprise don't go together. And also the world, people, institutions, whatever you want to call it, need time to adapt and think about these things. And I think one of the best things that OpenAI has done is this strategy, and we get the world to pay attention to the progress, to take AGI seriously, to think about what systems and structures and governance we want in place before we're like under the gun and have to make a rush decision. I think that's really good. But the fact that people like you and others say you still feel like there are these leaps makes me think that maybe we should be doing our releasing even more iteratively. I don't know what that would mean. I don't have an answer ready to go. But our goal is not to have shock updates to the world. The opposite.
Yeah, for sure. More iterative would be amazing. I think that's just beautiful for everybody.
But that's what we're trying to do. That's our stated strategy. And I think we're somehow missing the mark. So maybe we should think about, releasing GPT-5 in a different way or something like that.
Yeah, 4.71, 4.72. But people tend to like to celebrate. People celebrate birthdays. I don't know if you know humans, but they kind of have these milestones. And all
I do know some humans. People do like milestones. I totally get that. I think we like milestones too. It's fun to, say declare victory on this one and go start the next thing. But yeah, I feel like we're somehow getting this a little bit wrong.
GPT-5 Lex 和 Sam 讨论了即将发布的 GPT-5 模型。 Sam 表示，目前还不确定它的具体发布时间和命名，但他们今年肯定会发布一款令人惊喜的新模型。他提到，在发布 GPT-5 之前 ，OpenAI 还有许多其他重要的产品要先行发布。谈到 GPT-5 面临的挑战和瓶颈 ，Sam 表示需要在计算机性能、技术创新等多方面同时发力。OpenAI 的优势在于能将大量中等规模的创新融合成一个巨大的整体。他还强调宏观视野对技术创新的重要性，认为对整个领域有清晰的认识，往往能带来意想不到的洞见。
I know we have a lot of other important things to release first.
I don't know what to expect from GPT-5. You're making me nervous and excited. What are some of the biggest challenges and bottlenecks to overcome for whatever it ends up being called, but let's call it GPT-5? Just interesting to ask. Is it on the compute side? Is it on the technical side?
Always all of these. I was, what's the one big unlock? Is it a bigger computer? Is it like a new secret? Is it something else? It's all of these things together. Like the thing that OpenAI, I think, does really well. This is actually an original Ilya quote that I'm going to butcher, but it's something like, we multiply 200 medium-sized things together into one giant thing.
So there's this distributed constant innovation happening.
Yeah.
So even on the technical side,
especially on the technical side.
So even detailed approaches, detailed aspects of every. How does that work with different disparate teams and so on? How do the medium-sized things become one whole giant transformer? How does this?
There's a few people who have to think about putting the whole thing together, but a lot of people try to keep most of the picture in their head.
Oh, like the individual teams, individual contributors try to keep
at a high level. Yeah, I mean, you don't know exactly how every piece works, of course, but one thing I generally believe is that it's sometimes useful to zoom out and look at the entire map. And I think this is true for a technical problem. I think this is true for innovating in business. But things come together in surprising ways, and having an understanding of that whole picture, even if most of the time you're operating in the weeds in one area, pays off with surprising insights. In fact, one of the things that I used to have, and I think was super valuable, was I used to have a good map of all of the frontier, or most of the frontiers in the tech industry. And I could sometimes see these connections or new things that were possible that if I were only, deep in one area, I wouldn't be able to have the idea for, because I wouldn't have all the data. And I don't really have that much anymore. I'm super deep now. But I know that it's a valuable thing.
You're not the man you used to be, Sam.
Very different job now than what I used to have.
Speaking of